It's tax day. Have you filed your taxes? Meanwhile, poor proficiencies don't seem to correlate with graduation rates. America's talking, and Illinois' prisons audited. This is the Center Square Daily for Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. It's tax day in the United States with federal and state taxes due. The Tax Foundation says right now the tax system is so complex that millions of people feel like they need an accountant just to understand their obligations. Businesses delay investments because they can't predict future tax policy, and families spend hours navigating rules that should be straightforward. A new report from the National Taxpayers Union Foundation says taxpayers are expected to spend 6.93 billion hours and more than $477 billion to be in compliance with the 2026 tax filing season. And as again you saw there, it's a hefty price split across the country, and that comes out to about 12 hours per person and $290 per average American. Now, the report estimated the average American will spend 12 hours and $290 to complete their tax returns, and the report anticipating a decrease in compliance burdens from its peak at nearly 8 billion hours in 2023. Now, the report estimates tax compliant costs include $320 billion in lost time and at least $157 billion in out-of-pocket expenses, including tax software and professional services. Now, the report also found the current tax code contains 4.26 million words and contains provisions that may overcomplicate tax burdens. Now, the report noted that the tax provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill and the Tax Cuts and Working Families Act simplifies tax compliance burdens for 30 million additional Americans. But what about local state tax policy? No matter what a state offers in terms of natural beauty, work, and social opportunities, it's tax and economic policies, as unglamorous as they sound, that will play a role in the state's attractiveness and success over time, according to authors of the Rich States, Poor States report. Now, this report ranks various states for economic outlook based on 15 economic policy variables like personal income tax rates, corporate tax rates, property taxes, sales taxes, and the state's minimum wage. Now, the ALEC Laffer State Economic Outlook Rankings for 2026 gives us the top states for economic ranking, but also the bottom states: Utah, Tennessee, Idaho, North Carolina, Arizona, all in the top 5 for economic outlook rankings. Now, on the bottom end, you've got New York, New Jersey, Vermont, California, and Connecticut. Now, a core idea behind Rich States, Poor States is that a state's key economic and tax policies play a real role in its attractiveness as a place to live and raise a family. More people will either move for a job or they'll choose to move because the quality of life they believe is possible for them to move there. And with that, you've got the economic performance rankings between 2014 and 2024. And not a surprise for a lot of people, the top 5 states being Florida, Arizona, Idaho, Utah, and Nevada. The bottom 5 states: West Virginia, Alaska, Connecticut, Illinois at number 49, and Louisiana at number 50. Now, one place that it's clear to the minority party in Illinois is the land of Lincoln. Just this morning, for tax day, Republican State Representative Tom Weber, he criticized majority Democrats in the State House for their tax and spend policies for the land of Lincoln.
Since 2011, Illinois have been hit by at least 70 tax and fee increases. At least 49 of those increases have been enacted under Governor Pritzker's administration. He's only been governor since 2019. Illinois tax revenue has increased by $18 billion since 2019. That's a 50% increase that far outpaces inflation. Last year's budget included a $700 million tax increase alone. Each Illinoisan is paying $1,434 each, not household, each, more in taxes than when Pritzker took office.
Now, Republican State Representative Stephen Reich joining with Weber, he had an idea of how he thinks things could change in Illinois.
So the taxes in this state are increasing without legislation. It's just increasing because of poor economic policies that drive that drive costs up here throughout the state. And I think maybe a suggestion to fix this would be to do away with wage withholding on your pay. Let you go home with your full paycheck and then have to send a check to the government every month or every quarter to show yourself how much you're actually paying in taxes. Maybe that's a solution. But until we find a solution to the spending problems that this state has, we're going to continue talking about this every April 15th.
Now, again, Illinois very low on the rich states, poor states rankings, and taxes being a major contributor to that. But be sure to subscribe to the Center Square Daily to catch our interview later this week with a representative from ALEC to talk in more detail about the latest Rich States, Poor States report. Now, one area taxpayers pay quite a bit for is public education. And to get us the latest on the correlation or lack thereof between proficiency rates and graduation rates is the Center Square education reporter, Esther Wickham. Esther, is there a correlation here? Are we seeing our nation's economy and the education space really matching up with what you would expect? Proficiency versus graduation. Are we sending kids across that graduation stage to get a diploma without them really being proficient?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. That's really the big question we've been asking since we're coming up on the end of the spring semester, the end of the 2025-26 academic year, and we're looking at graduation rates just absolutely skyrocket, right? Increase being the highest they've been in the past decade or so. But at the same time, many national education assessment reports have been showing that there's been a steady and significant decline for proficiency levels and for academics, especially for seniors that are about to head off to college in the fall, the workforce over the summer into the fall. And so the big question is, are public schools sending them into kind of readiness? Are they ready to enter into that area of adult life and responsibility? And so in my reporting, we looked at multiple different national assessment reports, and the National Assessment Governing Board reported that nationwide, only 1/3 of students meet proficiency benchmarks. And that's in specifically reading. And, since 2019 and the big question of, definitely the pandemic has been a part of affecting students' readiness and preparedness for tests for reading and math. Reading scores for 4th and 8th graders have dropped on average of 5 points. And this is according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, while 4th grade math scores have slightly improved since 2022, and I think that's because a lot of schools went back to being in person around that time, and there was more kind of engaging with teachers and students, but they remain 3 points below pre-pandemic levels in 2024. And so we see this steady decline in students' proficiency, in their ability to, take test scores well. And, according to NAEP data, 12th graders who are seniors, their scores are also steadily declining. And it's reported that only 35% of students are performing at or above proficient levels. And so now we see graduation rates steadily increasing, but at the same time, proficiency is steadily decreasing.
One of the things that you got to think, obviously, if 4th graders aren't doing that great, they can get them up to speed by the time they're a 12th grader. But nationwide, when it's 35% of 12th graders not having reading proficiency, but yet you see that graduation rate at 87%, what are people reacting to with this? How are those who observe the education space reacting to these types of numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. And even looking at all the state education departments, they're projecting that their graduation rates are between 73 to 93%. And this is from last year's academic year. So yeah, just like you said, they're steadily increasing. They're at a record high, and I was able to speak with 2 education experts who have talked a lot about that big question. are these higher education rates actually reflecting genuine academic progress? And so I was able to speak with Aaron Smith. He's the director of education reform at Reason Foundation. And he told me that, at the end of the day, no matter what state departments, say their graduation rates are, that's meaningless. And we shouldn't, put too much stock on that improvement, because no matter how many students you're kind of pushing through the door to get through graduation, when it comes to actually testing their knowledge and looking at the facts and the data of their test scores, you're not really getting that return on investment. And not only that, Greg, we have to look at what we've been seeing within the public school system. We've seen over 1 million students in the past couple of years drop out. Enrollment has significantly declined in public schools. And that's because of, birth rates are declining. The pandemic really affected a lot of students, but at the same time, there's been this new debate for school choice. So we see a lot of students too kind of stepping out and stepping away from the public school system to go into various other flexible education opportunities that their parents want them to go into.
Yeah, and I think that really was compounded quite a bit during the pandemic, when states across the country were saying, sorry, kids, you can't go to school. Here's Zoom, and you'll be able to learn everything you need to learn from Zoom. And I just don't think we've rebounded from that, especially the parents who saw that happening with their own eyes and saying, no, this is not the proper way to educate. And there seems to be, some reaction, at least from Republicans in Congress and the president, in recognizing that and saying, hey, we should start this national school choice scholarship program, give people tax credits to use their own dollars, put them into an education fund that a scholarship granting organization can then give to lower income students. But there's a little bit of a catch here, Esther. States have to opt into this program by 2027. Where's this being made an issue? It sounds common sense to a lot of people over in Congress.
Yeah. And that's the thing interesting to note as well. I was able to speak to Lance Azumi. He's one of the senior education directors at Pacific Research Institute. And he said that a big reason he thinks a lot of these students are being, pushed towards graduation, even if they're not doing super well, is because of that funding, right? Schools get money for how many kids are in those chairs, every single year. And so he noted that, these kinds of requirements are a big part that play a role into these inflated, grade inflation, graduation rates inflation. And he thinks that, these districts receive this kind of funding based on, student attendance, and that in turn creates, an incentive for these school districts to kind of keep these students enrolled and kind of push them towards graduation. And even, past students, we've talked about it. There was a school district in New York State that was under investigation for failing students, right? They're getting 30s and 40s on their tests, and the teachers are like, all right, you get an A, because they want to get that number at the end of the day to get that funding. And that's exactly right. What Lance highlighted was school choice has been a huge competitor to public schools. And I think that's why we're kind of seeing this competition. And, with school choice and especially these federal tax credit programs, more and more states over time are opting in. Before there was about 27 states, but as of now, there's 29 states that are opting in. And this is a bipartisan issue. There are Democrats, there are Republicans that see the benefit, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of experts and analysts and even parents and teachers recognize that parents, should have that choice, should have that flexibility to figure out what's best for their child.
And again, that program passed as part of that One Big Beautiful Bill Act that the president signed last 4th of July. And he's got his education secretary going around encouraging states that aren't part of it to jump into this. And as you said, we've got 29 states that have opted into it, but 2027 is coming right around the corner, and that's when this program's supposed to start. One thing in Illinois I've heard criticism of is a taxpayer in Illinois right now can donate to a scholarship granting organization and get the tax benefit from that. But a kid in Illinois can't take part in that program because Illinois is not opted into it. Same story for Pennsylvania.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing a lot of people, Republican or Democrats that are in these two specific states are kind of pleading with Governor J.B. Pritzker and Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, saying if we do not opt in, taxpayers are going to be spending this money, putting this money out there, but our specific state is not going to be receiving those benefits. Our students within education are not going to be receiving those benefits. And a little while ago, I was able to talk with a state representative in Pennsylvania, Martina White, and she talked about her kind of disappointment of Governor Shapiro for why he hasn't opted in. And she's saying, if we do opt in, that's going to put taxpayers at a better advantage. And if we don't, they're at a major disadvantage because these dollars are going to go into these various tax credit programs. And at the end of the day, we want them to, because they go directly into the hands of families, and families get to make that decision and what's best for them. And so recently we saw the U.S. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. She's been a huge advocate for these federal tax credit programs, mainly because as the Department of Education continues to dismantle itself, as she says, cut the red tape of bureaucracy, she is urging specifically Governor Shapiro to opt in for the benefit not only of the state of Pennsylvania, but also for taxpayers nationwide. And I think over time we're going to continue to see that positive impact.
Well, again, you'll be able to find all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com. So get the newsletter in your inbox and check out Esther's latest by looking at the issues at thecentersquare.com. Now it's time for America's Talking with headlines from across the country. You can find in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter free at thecentersquare.com. The Colorado Senate Tuesday gave final approval to a bill adding more regulations to gun stores operating within the state. House Bill 261126, titled Requirements for Firearms Dealers, was approved in its third reading in a 20-15 vote, sending it to Governor Jared Polis's desk to be signed into law. Now, what the bill does, it directs the Department of Revenue in the state of Colorado to adopt new security rules for gun dealers, which must adopt the measures and submit a plan to the state by October 1st of next year. It would also require gun dealers to keep an electronic record of firearm transfers and would allow the state to fine gun dealers up to $75,000 for some violations. Republicans and gun rights groups argue the legislation is part of a larger effort by Democrats to chip away at Second Amendment rights and make it harder and more expensive to buy firearms. A man accused of orchestrating one of Minnesota's largest Medicaid fraud schemes has failed to appear in court, forcing a delay in his $11 million trial and prompting a search by law enforcement. Last week, the individual did not show up for a scheduled pre-hearing in Hennepin County, leading a judge to issue a warrant for his arrest. His jury trial was set to begin this week, but the individual said to be able to leave after posting a $150,000 unconditional bond, which did not require him to surrender his passport. A lower $50,000 conditional bond would have required him to give up travel documents, but he instead chose the higher amount with fewer restrictions. Investigators in that case have previously warned that he was a flight risk, citing that his family connections abroad, including a wife and child in Kenya. Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison, said his office is now working with federal authorities to locate the individual. In Washington, legislation that would have again raised taxes on nicotine products did not advance in the 2026 session, but smokers and other tobacco users are already paying some of the highest prices in the nation, with growing evidence that high tax rates fueling the illegal trade. Now, Senate Bill 6129 in Washington, it sought to impose a new 90% excise tax on most non-cigarette nicotine products and a 100% excise tax on flavored nicotine products. It would have also have raised the cigarette tax in Washington state by nearly $2 more per pack. North American Affairs Manager for the Consumer Choice Center, David Clement, he told the Center Square in Washington that once a tax becomes too punitive, it stops encouraging people to quit and starts producing unintended consequences.
And so we shouldn't be ratcheting up taxation on reduced risk products that significantly lower the public health costs related to smoking, because all that does is make it harder for people to switch or to quit, whether that be vaping, whether that be nicotine pouches, you name it. The Mexican cartels have capitalized on at least some aspects of that in the illegal trade. And so we, as any illegal venture does, if you can find an avenue to make money, you exploit it. And so that is the other potential issue beyond the state not getting tax revenue or the safety of the products.
Now be sure to subscribe to the Center Square Daily for an update from Washington State with Washington in focus. Meanwhile, Houston Mayor John Whitmire is in trouble with the state after certifying a grant application that the city and Houston Police Department would cooperate with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement after the city council passed an ordinance restricting the police department from doing so. Now, last month, Whitmire, who's long supported law enforcement, instituted a policy requiring HPD officers to cooperate with ICE. The new policy required officers to wait 30 minutes for ICE to come and pick up illegal foreign nationals in question. The warrants were issued after a federal immigration judge issued a removal order after they went through a due process. Now, in response, the Democratic-led city council in Houston opposed that action. And later on, when the city was applying for federal grants, they have to certify certain things. And the certificate it requires the signer acknowledges that if the city fails to comply with the requirements, the PSO could terminate any grants the governor's office made to the city, totaling an estimated $110 million. Now, the city's already facing a more than $150 million deficit, as the mayor is currently in budget preparations. And that is America's Talking with headlines from across the country. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Center Square Daily. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Now let's put Illinois in focus. The Illinois Department of Corrections facing questions over its failure to comply with state law and spending hundreds of millions of dollars on overtime costs. The Legislative Audit Commission is a bipartisan group of lawmakers, and they meet once a month to review audits from the Illinois Auditor General of all of the various state agencies. They met this week, Tuesday, at the state capitol, and they questioned Illinois Department of Corrections leaders over 40 compliance findings for a 2-year period ending June 2024. Now, IDOC Director LaToya Hughes reported progress, noting the department's findings were reduced to 40 from 60 in the previous audit. Here's State Senator Laura Ellman questioning why they're seeing higher spending levels at IDOC, but they have fewer inmates.
How much has your budget increased while your population has decreased? Or if you have the budget dollars per incarcerated person. And I think this is important because, these dollars that our taxpayers are spending, we want to make sure that we're getting value from these dollars. So that's kind of where I'm leading to that. So thank you.
I don't have the numbers for population decrease versus contract increase, but again, something we can certainly get for you.
Mm-hmm.
That was IDOC Chief Financial Officer James Dean saying the department's budgets increased 8 to 10% annually. Hughes, the director of IDOC, said there are a little more than 30,000 individuals in IDOC custody, and she said that healthcare, education, staffing, and operational costs increase every year, and facilities need to be maintained, whether they have 5 or 1,500 people. Now, IDOC reported a population of more than 44,000 in 2016. Again, now it's about 30,000. Employment policy, also an issue. Employment includes allowing workers who take a vacation week to then come back to work and work 4 hours at an overtime rate. Here is State Representative Amy Ellick questioning that policy, saying it's shameful.
Do you feel like that's a bad idea? It seems like a bad idea to me.
Again, we comply with the collective bargaining agreement that's in place.
So this has been going on since 2014. So in 1 year's time, it was $151 million. So take that times the last 12 years, because obviously this is still going on even after the audit period, correct? This hasn't been changed since this audit period ended?
That particular process has not changed, correct?
Okay. That's shameful. That, I don't understand that whatsoever, and I don't think that healthcare workers probably have that benefit in any, or, you know, other industries have that benefit to where you don't have to work a full week or any time, and yet you decide to pick up a shift and you get overtime pay. That doesn't make sense to me.
Now, State Senator Chapin Rose, he is a Republican on the committee as a co-chair. He said that IDOC and the Department of Children and Family Services are the two worst run departments in the state, and they have something in common.
I don't know why the two worst run departments in this state are the ones that deal with the lives of people. You guys in DCFS. We are being fleeced as taxpayers. We are putting people's lives at risk, the men and women that work there every day, as well as the inmates. So we've got federal law violations, we've got state law violations. It is sort of the ultimate in ironies that you're housing the people who we accused of violating the state law, and then you guys are violating the state law. Resolve that irony. We've got standard negligence. 70% of vehicles didn't get oil changes, and then somehow we're supposed to have emergency procurements for new vehicles. I don't know. Is there any correlation?
Now, Rose said the department also failed to report offender resident information, failed to report data on electronic monitoring, and did not comply with safety and sanitization standards. Meanwhile, a U.S. appellate court ordering two defendants in a ComEd 4 case to be released pending a new trial. And this deals with Mike Madigan, and we talked earlier this week with Jim Talamonte from Illinois about that Madigan case. He's the former Illinois House leader, and the House Speaker was the Speaker of the House for more than 30 years. And he's filing for an appeal in his case with an appeals court set to make a ruling on whether or not he can appeal. We'll hear about that. But the ComEd 4 being associates of Mike Madigan in a separate trial. They were found guilty and sentenced to prison, but now it appears there might be a new trial. Hours after oral arguments began Tuesday in Chicago, the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals directed the federal government to release former ComEd CEO Ann Pramaggiore on board pending a new trial. Now, the appeal court also ruled confidant Michael McLean, who worked with Mike Madigan for years, is entitled to bond because he's not likely to flee nor pose a danger to the safety of any other person in the community, and because the appeal raises a substantial question that will result in an order for a new trial. So they said they reversed the district court's denial of McLean's motion for a bond pending resolution of his appeal. Both Pramaggiore and McLean are entitled to release, the appeals court said. So the two being convicted of conspiracy, bribery, and falsely putting records together as the ComEd 4 trial in 2023. And again, that was directly linked with the trial of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. We'll be watching to see what happens next in both of those high-profile corruption cases and just how people are going to be held accountable. So be sure to get the latest headlines in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. From my studio in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from across the country, only with the Center Square Daily.